Was this computer? It wasn't. Thank good catch, Ellie. Jesus.
Was okay.
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 Okay. Start that again, just for the recording people. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Academy of Theosophia's first official public debate. These debates are a part of a new initiative by the young Theosophists in Perth and other states to create spaces for rigorous, respectful inquiry. The aim is to not only arrive at final answers, but to engage deeply with the kinds of questions that shape how we live, think, and understand the world. Through structured disagreement, we hope to sharpen ideas, open perspectives for both the speakers and for those listening. For those who don't know, the Academy of Theosophia is a platform created to explore esoteric and philosophical traditions in a way that's grounded, living, and accessible. It's a part of a broader goal to revive a theosophical conversation, particularly among younger audiences, and to reanimate the search for wisdom in a modern context. So, tonight we begin with a question that strikes at the very foundation of what wisdom is and how it's defined. The question is, must one suffer to know true wisdom? Is wisdom something that we can reach through contemplation, or does it only come through knowledge that is embodied through trial and tribulation? A quick word on our format as well. So, how it'll work is everyone will have a 2 minute introduction, roughly. It's okay if we go a bit over or under, uh, keeping a 4 minute introduction on each side. This is going to be followed by a round of rebuttals, so responses for each side, another round of responses to those responses, and then at the end, there's going to be a free-for-all discussion where no moderator is involved and it's just going to be back and forth between people. My job is to kind of just keep everything on track and also to summarize the points, just so everyone kind of understands where the conversation is heading. And then finally, we'll end with a Q&A. So if anyone has any questions throughout, just drop them in the chat, and then at the end, we can read them out. If anyone's really desperate to talk, just use the hand up feature, and I should be able to see you. But otherwise, that's it. Please keep, if there's noise going on in surroundings, just keep microphones muted, if possible. If you experience any technical issues, just reach out, let us know. And I can't see everything because I'm in immersive view, but hopefully I'll be able to see you. I think if you use the hand up function, you immediately pop to the top of my screen. And this session is also recorded just for use later on. No one in the audience, if they don't want to be on it, we can crop you out or whatever it is. You just let us know. But other than that, let's get started. So we'll dig into the introductions. So just in terms of the positions, for the against position, so the position that says you do not need to suffer in order to attain wisdom, we have Ellie and Angelo. And for the side that says you do need to suffer in order to attain wisdom, we have James and Ari. So they're going to explain their positions. If anyone wants to clarify again which side, just ask in the chat. So we'll start with Ellie and sorry, we'll start with the four position. So we'll start with James and Ari. If either of you two want to start off, you have 2 minutes to talk.
Um, cool. Yeah, I can begin. So for my starting argument, I want to appeal to all sorts of spiritual teachings and traditions and science as well. So I'll begin with the obvious one, will be Buddhism, and it teaches that suffering comes from ignorance, and ignorance is sort of separation, and through that separation, you're going to suffer. But in the end, inevitably, through that process, through the evolution that everyone has to go through, you will become, you'll attain true wisdom, essentially. So that's Buddhism. And then there's Hinduism, where in their big text, which is probably the Bhagavad Gita, one of the bigger ones, Arjuna is faced with this dilemma of having to sort of fight against his own family members. And he faces this inner sort of suffering. But due to this, um, his horse chariot rider, Krishna, enlightens him with a lot of wisdom in that we all have our own paths in this world, and that by the end of that, because he goes through this inner suffering, he realizes that he has to fight. He gains that wisdom in the end and has that realization. And then appealing to science, if we go to Darwinian evolution, adaptive evolution is when let's say that the weak die because they don't have the traits that are needed for evolution. And so because of this, those creatures, those weaker creatures will have to suffer. They'll have to go through some painful deaths or just death. And eventually there'll be that sort of inner wisdom of that species, the biological wisdom to evolve. And then I'll say one more thing in alchemy. It's the dark night of the soul or the process of dissolution, which is things need to go down to the most primal state and sort of separate and be combined back together. And that eventually creates the Philosopher's Stone, which is this state of enlightenment. So I'm just appealing to all these different myths and traditions and scientific teachings that all sort of point towards the same thing, that there needs to be some sort of pain. Like it is almost a must in order to gain true wisdom. And that can't be obtained through observation. It may be obtained through observation through observing those people that suffer, but people will have to suffer at one point in order to gain that true wisdom.
Great. Fantastic. Okay. And Ari?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Yes, so we are pro for the concept that one must suffer to know true wisdom. And following on from James is really looking at the laws of creation, and this physical reality, looking at the fact that we must become separate first to know love, to know wisdom, to know the opposite of that thing. We must experience that first. Um, so it it's part of the creation. One of the creation theories is that in order to experience love, which could be, wisdom is a piece of love. Sorry about my video. We need to know other than, and they're like defining suffering with this Buddhist term that James was speaking of is suffering, another way of saying separation, another way of not knowing unity in all forms. Suffering comes in all forms, but that's the core of it. Um, to be able to be in the face of separation and still know unity would be the opposite of suffering, no matter what external circumstances are happening. Um, so it's really a part of physical reality that we need to have suffering because we need to have something other than to know it, to know it truly, to know it. That's why this reality's been birthed, to know something other than love. And also looking at the concept of it is happening and suffering has happened for eons, like all of human history, apart from Eden mythical stories, humans have been suffering. And the fact that it has happened means it has to have happened. If we look at the law of, like, God's law of God's will, if it's happening, it's meant to. Like, God's will is here. And so the fact that it is happening means it must need to be here. It must need to be a part of our human experience of evolution and evolving our consciousness into a state where we no longer need that. So it must be. Thank
Fantastic.
you.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank you very much for that. So, On the on your guys' side, I'm getting a lot of it's based in nature. So James, you had your kind of trifecta there of science, religion, and esotericism. I really like it. I'm going to be interested to hear that. So the idea that um, us suffering is kind of baked into the evolutionary process, and that psychological suffering is just a byproduct or a flow on from that. But also, you're going to be citing a little bit of Buddhism, which is really good because that was definitely in my notes. That obviously the religion that has its four noble truths is, to do with suffering is going to be a big one. And then also, Ari, with your idea of you need to know unlove in order to know love. This separation from truth is also speaks to a similar note. So excellent. All right. So on to the against side, we have Ellie and Angelo. So do you guys want to have a crack at your 2 minutes? Great. Okay. Maybe we should start with Angelo. Yep.
Okay, yes, happy to start.
Great.
Look, I have three different points. The first one is that I think that James touched this point, which is that suffering is ignorance. But the question is, what is suffering? And the way how I define suffering is that suffering is a subjective experience. That it is a subjective experience of a more basic instinct, that is dissatisfaction or pain. So, because suffering is a subjective experience, suffering is a subjective experience from the ego. So, it's the way how the ego experiences reality. So, how can the ego be illuminated through suffering? I don't think that that's possible, because the suffering is the way how the ego defines reality, and wisdom goes beyond the ego, is going beyond that suffering, that subjective experience of how we define pain or something that is more basic. I don't know if this is clear, like the point I'm trying to make, but in summary, what I'm saying is that suffering is something coming from the ego, not coming from consciousness. If suffering is a way to wisdom, so I put an example for let's say a dog or an animal. Let's like you put an animal to suffer a lot. Will that suffering make the animal wiser? Will that suffering make a dog wiser? If the suffering is the one that is leading to wisdom, there is something else going on. Wisdom is not about suffering. Wisdom is about something else, because otherwise the dog or anyone who is going through suffering will be enlightened. My second point is that another example is that if suffering leads to wisdom, all the humanity by now will be wise, because, like we have gone through so much pain and suffering. And obviously you see some people who get wisdom, but you can say that all humanity is reaching that wisdom. I think that doesn't, I think that it's evident that suffering doesn't lead to wisdom. The another point that I want to make is that, just to define what wisdom is, for me, wisdom is the result of an alchemical process where you transmute pain or something that is more basic, dissatisfaction, into knowledge, into wisdom through consciousness. So you can actually gain wisdom from like positive emotions like joy, like happiness. And you don't get wisdom just by suffering. There are positive emotions that actually leads to wisdom as well. So I don't think that actually suffering as such is the only way to get wisdom, if if actually through suffering you can get wisdom, which is the argument that I'm trying to make. I don't think that suffering actually leads to wisdom, because suffering, as I said before, is the experience, is the way how the ego experiences reality.
Great. Okay, fantastic. Lovely set of arguments there. I like that you had good three strong arguments. Just to recap, you're pointing out that suffering is a subjective experience, and that subjective experience is not a solid foundation to form our definition of wisdom. If suffering equals wisdom, where's all the wisdom? And suffering isn't the only thing, that the virtue or characteristic or behavior that leads to wisdom. So really good arguments. And now your turn, Ellie.
Yeah, so I think mine sort of is somewhat similar to Angelo's. We did speak a little bit before the debate. But first of all, warm thank you to everyone for being here today and for the affirmative team to engage in this debate with us, and for you, Malik, for moderating. So Angelo and I are representing the opposition team. And so we stand in the view that suffering is not necessary for the attainment of wisdom. So we do not dispute that suffering can be a path that leads to wisdom. You know, history and literature, novels, you can pick up a book and read about suffering. There's some scriptures and texts about suffering that show that it can lead to wisdom. However, we don't say that it's the only path. In fact, it can be attained through other paths. Its counterpart, love. Ari touched on that about sort of separateness. I'm not sure I completely agree that separateness is about suffering. I think it can be separate. To be separate can be very exciting as well, and can I don't know, induce this excited evolution. I don't think it has to be suffering. And furthermore, as Angelo will explore more deeply and has sort of already kind of touched on, it is not suffering itself that produces wisdom, but rather one's response to suffering. So Viktor Frankl, a renowned psychiatrist who did go through a lot of suffering, he was in a concentration camp. He wrote that even after all that suffering, that everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. So he was in the most suffering situation you could find or see, and he did not point that it was the suffering that led him to wisdom, but it was his attitude towards the suffering that led him to wisdom. So it is this inner freedom, this capacity to choose how one aligns with their higher self, that gives rise to wisdom. And that same free will, that same conscious alignment can be exercised in context of joy, beauty, love, curiosity, art, and learning, not just through pain and trauma. So in short, suffering may be one teacher, but is not the only one, and certainly not a required one.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Ellie. Very well put and very well structured as well. So now we're going to go into the rebuttals. So this can be as fast-paced or as slow-paced as you like. We want to keep any one individual response not too long. So what's going to happen now is James and Ari, you're going to respond to what Angelo and Ellie have said, and then Ellie and Angelo respond to them. Okay, so does anyone want to start, either James or Ari?
Yeah, I guess I can touch on when Angelo was saying that there's other methods of gaining wisdom, such as joy, for example. But I do feel like the root of that change of perspective and insight does come from a point of suffering. Because whilst positive emotions like joy can support the growth of wisdom, I do believe that the root of it is suffering, and that is what that leads to true wisdom. And that's what, yeah, actually, Malik, would you sort of define true wisdom as well? Could make that a bit clearer.
Well, this is kind of us kind of uncovering that. Now, to make the kind of premise of this discussion more clear, there's two possibilities with regards to wisdom, the same way that there's two possibilities with regards to the definition of courage. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with, is the courageous man the man who doesn't fear, or is the courageous man who fears but does what he needs to do anyway? And both are often used as a definition for courage, both not fearing and moving forward in spite of fearing. It's the same thing with wisdom. Now, in order for someone to be wise, the question is this, is do they need to embody the wisdom, or is simply a mere knowledge of the wisdom enough? Does that make sense? So could you, for example, let's say we take the philosophy of having a positive attitude. Let's take Viktor Frankl's Your Attitude perspective, right? Now, if I just read that in a book, is that sufficient as to me now being like taking on that wisdom? Or do I need to go through a somewhat similar set of circumstances that Frankl did, and even just a more in an extreme form that he did, or even in a minor form, in order to really understand what he means?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess well, touching on that, I guess it would reflect, the direct type of experience of suffering you have would reflect the amount of wisdom you have as well.
Hmm.
And if you're reading it through observation, yes, you can have that intellectual understanding of it, but you don't have an experiential.
Yeah, but that's the question. Is the experiential necessary, or can one kind of derive wisdom without that?
I think if it goes back to the root of um because one person or one being would have had to experience some sort of suffering in order for that knowledge to get passed on. So essentially, I would say it is a necessity because someone has to be the guinea pig.
Got you. So, like, in order to set the benchmark to determine truth and falsity, there has to be a case which proves it, just like in
Correct.
science.
Let's say that is the true wisdom, and then everything passed on is, you could say, wisdom. But if in the title, if it's true wisdom, then a type of suffering has to happen.
Got you. Great. That's good that we got on your position. So 100% experience is necessary for true wisdom.
Mm.
Okay, Angelo or Ellie, or sorry, we'll go into Ari first. Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing actually. Like at the base of it, someone, we can tune in to the collective experience and we can, do that on a personal level or a written level or a, higher conscious level, whatever way we're tapping into the Akashic records, anything like that, we're still tapping into someone having had that experience of suffering and through that knowing what it is to know true wisdom through experience, like James was saying. I had a quick rebuttal on something Angelo was speaking about the animals, like how they're not suffering and gaining wisdom from it. But then also I just wanted to just put this point on it of, is an animal actually suffering though? Because we as humans say that they are, but essentially we've labeled it as that. And it's often like an emotion that creates suffering or that separation, or like something needs to change for me to be okay right now. That's kind of like the definition of suffering or like resistance to the situation as it is. And I'm not sure animals do that. I don't know if they go, I shouldn't be feeling this. I don't know if they even can put that understanding together. They just feel it, they just experience it. So are they suffering when they're having a painful experience? I don't know. It just might be happening to them. So yeah, I just wanted to cover that point because we can't really put the two together as a comparison because they don't have thought in the way that humans do. They don't have language.
Okay.
And
But
yeah.
I'm gonna also mention that animal thing as well. In Theosophy and Anthroposophy, they do speak of this in science nowadays, actually, as well. This sort of collective evolutionary field. And as these animals suffer, it sort of goes into this field. And also, it sort of allows us humans, like we see animals suffering, and it allows us to have this compassion and this wisdom to treat them better through this observation of this suffering. Although we're not experiencing the suffering itself, we have the capacity to view that suffering, and from then gain that wisdom to treat them better.
Okay. Got you. All right. So we need Angelo. Could you directly respond to that animal response?
Yes, but I want to respond with a question.
Yep.
So my question, and obviously it seems to be like not related, but actually is related just because I want to make a point.
Yep.
I would like to ask James and Ari, what is the purpose of Buddhism? You know, like what was the main teaching of Buddha? And if you look for it, the purpose of Buddhism is to end suffering. So if suffering leads to wisdom, so is Buddhism then wanting to end wisdom? You know, like if suffering leads to wisdom and the purpose of Buddhism is to end suffering, so is Buddhism actually saying that we should stop getting wisdom, you know, like gaining more wisdom? Because there is there like some sort of paradox with what you are saying. If suffering is necessary for wisdom, then why a wisdom teaching is teaching us to end suffering? I have another question as well, which is, can you experience something like a challenging experience without suffering? You
Okay,
can.
sorry, Angelo.
Yeah.
That was a red hot question. It's a good question. I just want to stick on that because it'll get too confusing if we have multiple questions in the air. So I'm going to put the burden of answering that on James because he finds it amusing, I can tell. So what do you think of that, James?
Yeah, it is a bit of a paradox, but from what I know of Buddhism, it teaches that suffering is inevitable, but Buddhism is teaching the wisdom to end the suffering, which leads to true wisdom. That's basically how I'd summarize it. But that suffering is inevitable. It's part of our world. It's a necessity. But through that process, through teaching, and through just practices, you gain true wisdom. If you
So James, is like wisdom is static. Then once you end suffering, you gain true wisdom, and then that's it.
But
Wisdom
to
is
get
static.
to wisdom, you have to have suffering that you have to end. So you need the suffering to gain the wisdom to end. Does that make sense? It's like through letting go of suffering, you're gaining true wisdom. So without suffering, how would you gain that? How
Well,
would you have something to let go of?
And what happens once you achieve the wisdom
You're
through
back with
suffering?
God.
Okay, could I resolve this? Because I love it. But the question, no one says that wisdom is an end. So as to whether or not there is something or nothing beyond it, it it's really good that you point it. I would call this the like eradication of wisdom, or like it's almost like a Ouroboros, like a snake eating its own tail. That the pursuit of wisdom will eventually end in the pursuit of wisdom's eradication, right? Because if you absolve yourself of suffering, you're incapable of producing something that would need wisdom to overcome it. This is spoken about in Greek mythology, actually. At the time of Saturn, no one no one needed order because order was written into action itself. Anyway, so um, although yes, you might have found that you can eradicate wisdom by saying that if you cure yourself of suffering. The question is that in order to get that wisdom, in order for it to eradicate itself, do you need to suffer, or can you do it by reading a book?
I agree that experience is important. Without experience, you can learn, but I don't think that you need necessarily to suffer to gain the experience, because suffering is the experience from the ego.
Okay.
Once you observe reality from consciousness, you can keep gaining wisdom through consciousness. But actually, from the beginning, you gain the wisdom through consciousness. It was not through suffering. Suffering was processed through consciousness to get into wisdom. But it's not that suffering was the one who led to wisdom. That's not right. Because otherwise, as I argued before, everyone will be enlightened by now if that was the process to to gain wisdom.
Okay. All right.
Can
So
I
we've got
add on something?
yes, yes. I was just about to get to you, Ellie. So we'll get stuck into that ego argument. So just to update the audience, so Angela has this argument from ego that if suffering is based on ego and ego is something that's relative, then we're basing wisdom on something that's relative. But before we get into that, I do want to go to you, Ellie, to see if you want to respond to anything that has been said.
Yeah, so I think that the direct embodied experience is very important. Um, I do think though that different souls have different paths. Um, and so, and I also believe that free will plays a part. And so while I do think that it is important, has been in the past, definitely, for some people to have suffered, to spread knowledge in the way that has happened, you can have you can use your free will also to choose um, situations where you're embodied in direct experience of joy, curiosity. Look at our first theosophical principle. Our first objective is to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. Be it noted that the word used is distinction, not difference. We recognize the difference and always have, and the difference is so important. The parts make up the whole. We all have different paths, and suffering is one of those paths, but it's not the only one towards wisdom.
Mm. Okay, great. So I do want to get stuck into that a little bit. I want to press you on a few things there, Ellie. But before we do that, sorry, I don't want to press it as I'm playing for the other team. But just to expound on, if you do think that there are other paths to wisdom, how do those paths exist without suffering? That's what we're going to get into. But okay, does James or Ari have anything to say about Angelo's argument that suffering is a subjective, egotistical experience? If not, it's okay. We can move on and we can return to it. But I will warn, it will be uh
Suffering is egotistical experience that also connects
In,
to thing.
in summary, it's like saying ego is suffering. So you can go out from suffering if you don't go out from the ego. Consciousness is the one that allows to go to know the ego, which suffering is connected to ego. Once and you can gain wisdom by knowing the ego, which is suffering. But wisdom is beyond suffering. Wisdom is connected to consciousness, and you can gain wisdom even by experiencing, for example, samadhi. That is something that is beyond the ego, and it's an experience where you connect with reality as a whole, and that's the sort of that for me that's the way where wisdom comes. How can I say, like, what true wisdom is? True wisdom is consciousness. True suffering is ego. You can gain wisdom from the ego. You gain wisdom from consciousness, knowing the ego.
But I still stand on the point that why would you even need wisdom if you don't have suffering? So we need the ego to even need wisdom.
okay. But sorry, can I add on this? So just to I have a really good kind of thought experiment. Let's say there was someone and we were to wipe their brain of feeling negative emotion around their life. So like they don't get, like, let's say they don't want to get a job, they don't choose to work, they don't do anything, and the world is still hurting them, but they just don't care. Like they don't feel any suffering. Um, can you call that person wise? Or can that person find wisdom? That's a question I have.
So the person isn't suffering in the subjective sense,
Yeah,
but they
like you
are.
could do anything to them and they just won't feel any negative emotion. They don't have a faculty for it in their brain. Little thought experiment for you.
Well, I guess like is wisdom like that question is if it's are you wise if you know it or do you have to act wise? Like it kind of is dependent on how the person's acting.
Exactly.
So if yeah, so he might not know those things, but it's yeah, it doesn't really matter if he's not affected by the world, it's how he affects the world and how he makes his choices.
Great argument. Okay. So, Angelo, wisdom is not just what you feel about the world, it's how you act in the world as well. What do you
But
think?
no, I will say that wisdom is consciousness. It's how conscious you are about. It's how much aware. What is the level of awareness that you have of whatever you are experiencing? That is what gives you wisdom. So you can be there even no acting at all, and you can be gaining wisdom even if you don't express it.
Right. Okay.
There are two levels. There is one level that is like the being, and there is another level that is the doing. You don't necessarily need to be doing to be. You
But okay.
can be without doing.
Yeah, you want to go in, James?
Yeah, Angelo, for that consciousness of that soul to develop, do you think that would develop in just one lifetime, or would it be many lifetimes of suffering and through previous experience? If we're going into this sort of reincarnational past life point of view, it wouldn't just come from one life, this consciousness and awareness of one's ego. A lot of suffering would have had to occur for that to happen. Um,
Consciousness is coming from free will, as Ellie was saying. So you can suffer a lot, but even that awareness can be not there just because you are not interested in spiritual things. It must be there. You need to have an interest, a free will interest on in experiencing reality for that consciousness to awake. How it happens, I will say that that's a mystery. I will say that it's very hard to explain why someone has the will to be, like to wake up and to be aware. And I don't think that is suffering alone, the one that triggers that. Because as I said before, if it were for suffering, if it is because people suffer, everyone by now should have that level of awareness or interest for spiritual things. And it doesn't happen in that way.
well,
Okay.
yeah, I can't really say that that's a perfect argument at the last part where all of humanity would be wise by now, because like you've touched on, both of you touched on before, everyone's path is different. Everyone's level of suffering has been different in all sorts of lives or moments in life. So for everyone to have true wisdom is quite naive, I would say. But I think definitely because of all the suffering, our world has become a lot more wise than it has, say, 500 years ago.
So James, based on what you are saying, what you are arguing is that someone will eventually awake if that person is enduring a lot of suffering. It will get a point in different, like going through all these different lives where that awareness will, like will wake up, like it will come to that person. Is that what you are saying? That suffering will eventually leads to that person to liberation, like to awakening,
Yes,
just because of the suffering.
whether it be the next day or another lifetime, I definitely think the suffering
So
has impact. Yeah.
just to be clear, are we talking about the accumulation of experiences through past lives?
Yes,
Okay, all right.
and the suffering, and
Okay,
how that can lead someone to wake up consciousness.
okay. I want to restrict it to a single lifetime for the sake of argument. I know this is cutting off the argument, but it's just going to get too convoluted. Like I'm struggling to keep up at the moment, right?
Okay.
So, assuming that there are no other past lives, and this was something I was a little bit worried, Angelo, of bringing this idea of consciousness in, because we don't really understand what consciousness is, and it's almost like an empty bucket that we can just fill other ideas into. So let's assume that um, consciousness is just the typical awareness of the self, and there's no information that can be stored and accumulated into future lives. So let's say the thought experiment of a baby brought up with resources on another planet, right? Disconnected from culture, disconnected from past life. Does that make things more simple for you, James, as well?
Could you say that again? Sorry, I zoned out a
So
bit.
it's just let's get rid of the past life thing and just assume that it's in a single lifetime because it really does even go down to one principle. Like, yep, Ellie, come in.
Yes, this is slightly off, a little bit off, but I did have a question for the other team and also Angelo, because I was just thinking of this as everyone was talking. They've done studies on animals, and they're pretty sure it transfers across to humans as well in certain war-torn situations. People have reported this, that when they're watching someone else suffer, so that could be being tortured or hurt really badly, that if you actually measure the stress levels of the two people, the person being hurt and the person watching, their stress levels are actually a lot higher than the person who's been inflicted with the pain. Now, my question is because is that someone who's watching, are they suffering? It's sort of like the pathic principle, they're vicariously suffering on the other part, or is that more of an empathy? They're experiencing empathy and therefore love. Which one is it? Are they suffering or are they experiencing such a deep form of love for this person that they're becoming so distraught and feeling empathetic for them?
I think like stuff like if they're stressed and they're not in acceptance, then they would be in some sort of suffering. But it would like be coming from their care, like they're stressed out and they're suffering because they care. I think it's kind of both.
Yeah, so then can we actually separate like love and suffering in a way? I don't know. In that particular situation, I'm
Well,
not
I mean, I guess that was one of the points in the opening statement for like even reality to exist, we need the opposite of.
Yeah.
And and it's like so and then the point of to even have wisdom, you need something to find wisdom about, to have wisdom for. And so how could you have that if you don't have the opposite of not suffering? If everything's sweet all the time, we wouldn't need any wisdom. It would just be like, and that's where it was before there was re physical reality.
I think that's one thing we can agree on, yeah.
Mm.
I would like to define consciousness in the way how
Sure.
I understand consciousness. It's just that for me, I mean, I don't think that reality exists just because there are opposites. Consciousness is beyond opposites. People things that are opposed to each other. Consciousness, without speaking about previous lives or anything, consciousness is the awareness that we have, that we are here now. So consciousness really solo exists in the now. You can have a subjective explanation about what consciousness is, which then obviously goes into words, and it can go like in the future, in the past, in the now. but real consciousness only exists now because it's the experience that you are having of being here. And you can experience duality from consciousness. And the duality doesn't define the reality, it's consciousness. It's for that is for me very hard to leave behind consciousness in this conversation, because without consciousness there is no wisdom at all. So what if there is no, if the purpose is not to awaken consciousness, so why we are here?
That
You know,
is,
like
I hear you, but it's tied to almost a bigger discussion that we don't have time for, which is, can non-conscious entities be wise? Because there's an argument to yes, right? But we don't have time for that. I have to cut as soon as you start talking about consciousness, it gets too big. But I want to something that was missed on Ellie's point as well. So, Ellie, to your point, the question is, if you have in your scenario, you have someone who suffered physically a lot and someone who suffered as well because it was stressful for them, but not a lot, but the amount of wisdom doesn't correlate with more suffering. So if you have Buddha, right, and he's, walking down the street and seeing people on the side suffering, that man who was actually suffering, do we all know the story that I'm talking about with the Buddha, right? The man who was actually suffering, why didn't he become more wise than Buddha? So I think there's a really interesting argument hidden away there too, only because um, it's a lot to get into unless anyone wants to bring it up shortly before we finish the discussion. Um, but yeah, so why doesn't wisdom correlate with suffering? Do you have any thought, James?
Well, yeah, then again, I would chalk it down to even the observation of that sort of suffering when you feel it just as much as that suffering person does, just like Ellie alluded, that would lead to, well, because Buddha had a more sort of conscious mind, as Angelo would
Okay.
say, he was able to transmute that better than the person that probably had a lower level of consciousness. But because he was able to experience that sort of suffering, that empathy and compassion, he essentially suffered himself. So it's sort of a mixture. You need that
It's not
empathy.
just suffering. Suffering's a component, but not the whole thing. Like with Buddha, he
Yes.
had other traits that allowed his suffering to bloom into wisdom.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, it would have that trait of suffering and then that consciousness point of view as well. But in the end, having that direct experience of suffering will lead to true wisdom because of the people that you can reach through it, as well as your own experiential wisdom that comes out of it.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a
Great.
grander scale of wisdom that is developed through suffering. It's the most grand.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we should conclude our discussion there and then go into question time. Is everyone okay with that? Does anyone have any last words? No? Okay, all right. I feel like we ended with way more questions than what we started with. Speaks to the level of depth of this conversation. We had like the nature of whether suffering correlates with the more suffering you have, the more wisdom you get. We have, is suffering attached to consciousness? We didn't even get to go into something I wanted to get into was Ari's point on there's almost this point of dualities of if you have all of one thing, how can you almost need a dark in order to be a light, in order need a light in order there to be a dark, right? So unfortunately we didn't get to go into that. So all right, so we have a question from the audience. Anyone else with any more questions, chuck them in because we're going to start now, or you can speak. So Edward's question is, or statement is, I think both sides have great points. My question, would suffering be an endless cycle on the mental aspect, as that is the reality chosen, attaining wisdom to end suffering? So, do we think that it almost speaks to what we were earlier talking about on this paradox of wisdom coming about due to suffering, but then you almost abolish wisdom. Does anyone want to speak to that? Would it be an endless cycle?
It's suppose that we are here living just because we are in that endless cycle, and we will keep like living in this like in this reality until we end that cycle. So if we just see all this from the mental plane, I think that that's true. It will be wisdom based on suffering, and then you need to suffer more to gain more wisdom. But as I said before, I don't think that that's actually the real purpose of wisdom. Because wisdom needs to go beyond the circle, the loop that you can get into when you are in the mental plane of a duality.
And isn't it the loop like after you die, you're going through all the planes, and as you're dying, you're going through the processes where you have to sort out, like say you're on the astral plane or whatever, you have to sort out the astral plane until you can move on to the next plane. So from
Yep.
that sense, yeah, I remember from the talk the other day. So yeah, from
Yes,
that
but
sense, you think it couldn't be endless.
no, you drop. It's like you drop back to the mental plane because you are trapped into that duality of reality. So it's like, yes, wisdom leads to suffering, leads to wisdom, and then you need to suffer more to gain more wisdom. And it's an endless circle that you will not get rid of until you wake up consciousness. you become conscious.
Excellent, excellent input. Okay, does James or Ari have anything to say to that? Or if not, that's okay because it's a general question. No, that's okay. Not all good. So I have two hard questions for each side. Um, so for the side that does not believe suffering or does believe that, sorry, suffering and experience is necessary. So that's James and Ari's side. What would you say about all of the wisdom that you do know that you've never participated in? For example, hard drugs or life-altering substances or risky behaviors or anything, things that you've never done before, right? Would you call that wisdom? Like, do you think that that wisdom is important?
How do you know I haven't done it?
Well, let's just pick something you haven't done that you
I'm just kidding.
yeah.
Sort of.
But go on.
Um, James?
I was waiting for you. But yeah, I would say there is a degree of wisdom, but I wouldn't say it's the truest wisdom. Um, yeah,
Eh,
it is. It depends on what sort of situation you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that falls into what Ellie was saying about feeling empathy for someone when you see that person suffering. So I think that you can actually gain wisdom by having the empathy, not from the suffering itself, from the empathy and love that you feel for someone else.
But empathy, by definition, means you are feeling what the other person is feeling. So if you're feeling them suffering, then you are also suffering.
But you are not experiencing it because you are not in that person's position. So you are experiencing it from whatever position you are. If you are internally suffering, you obviously experience that empathy from suffering as well. But you can have empathy without
A
suffering.
direct experience, I should clarify.
Yep.
I would argue that it's direct experience.
Ooh, it sounds like secondhand experience. This is a game of cat and tail a bit, but I
Yeah,
understand what you mean. It is, in a way, everything is direct. Everything's a primary source in a way. Um, okay,
and the
all right.
hard thing about consciousness is because we may be feeling the exact same thing that someone else is feeling, and just because it's not our own doesn't mean it isn't
Yeah,
direct. Yeah,
it's a good argument. It's good. It's a good point. Yeah. Um, where does direct and indirect start and end? Is definitely a gray area. Okay, hard question for the other side. So, let's say you have two people. You have Plato, and someone who has read the works of Plato inside and out and knows every idea, every corner of it, but he has never seen the outside world. He's just been in a box like his whole life, a white room, for example. For those philosophically inclined, will uh, identify this as the Mary's room thought experiment, in which there's a girl named Mary, and she's in a room and she's told everything about the color red, but she's never seen it. And the question is, does she know red when she sees it? If she sees red, does she know immediately that's what it is, or doesn't she? So my question is, picture someone in a room, they've never seen the outside world, but they've read the works of Plato somehow. They just know it all. But they have nothing to attach that wisdom to. Is that man and Plato himself the same level of wisdom?
I think it's sort of two different types of wisdom.
Mm.
And I think two different types of true wisdom because one is Plato's sort of say more of a direct reality. And I hate to use that word because that opens up cans of worms too, but let's just say that word. Except then the other person, like, for that instance, if you've not seen the color red, but it's been described, you can imagine the color red. And you you're having an experience in imagination, um, which is in and of itself quite interesting.
Sorry to correct, you can't, because this person has never seen red. So it's almost like, how blind people who have never seen like color, they can't conceptualize the color. It's the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yes, I get that, but I suppose your whatever the experience is that you're going through, even though maybe it's not the exact red, it's still an experience to you. It's your own subjective um experience. I don't know.
Okay. Angelo?
Yeah, no, you can have a subjective experience of red, but you may not have idea what actually red is.
Okay. Would that
That's my
be
answer.
okay? Cool. So to a degree, a bit, first-hand experience from learning, sorry, first-hand wisdom from learning from an experience might be higher quality than wisdom you can learn from a book.
It depends how much it relates to your own experience.
Okay.
Yeah, I
So
think
you
that,
can,
oh sorry, Angel. I think that's a tough one because I get it and I'm all about embodied experience, but I also think that being wise is being able to make good decisions. So, healthy decisions, for instance, you can read about the effects of smoking and be truly wise to choose not to smoke without having to go be like, oh, I've got to smoke 10 packs of cigarettes to really experience this and then decide. So, I
Yeah.
think it goes back to the free will of choice being the true wisdom rather than experiences being true wisdom.
Mm, okay. This was a hard one. This was a very philosophical one and hits to the heart of like, what does it mean to know? Is knowledge based on experience, or is knowledge an idea that you can kind of abstractly have? Anything James or Ari would like to say?
No, yeah, no, this was a very philosophical one. And just when it gets down to the definitions of things, like every little thing, and the spectrum of definitions too. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
that was good. Good debate.
Great, fantastic. I wanted a hard question for each side in the questions section. So yeah, now concluding remarks. I just want to go through one by one. So we'll start with Ari. Any concluding remarks?
I forgot about a conclusion.
That's okay. Just off the cuff, just what you're feeling about it, and yeah.
Um, hmm. I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's no problem at all. James, do you want to go?
Yeah, I guess I'll just emphasize that it goes back way beyond past our time, and where this was taught that one being or beings in this current life have to go through a darkness or this pain or suffering, whether it's scientific or mythological or religious. It's written everywhere that at some point, to gain a high wisdom, you're gonna have to suffer. And for the knowledge of not smoking, someone would have had to have smoked a lot and suffered in order for that wisdom to be passed down.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd say that's my
Excellent.
general.
I still do really like the argument. We didn't get to go into it, but the idea that eventually down the line, wisdom has to attach itself to some material experience. That's quite interesting. Now, Angelo.
Mm, yeah, probably that. I think that the purpose of a spiritual path is to end our own suffering, whatever is coming from. And I don't think that that end will lead to more suffering at all. I think that that will lead to to a different reality where actually you can experience life beyond suffering, and even gain more wisdom as well.
Mhm. Excellent. Fantastic. And what about you, Ellie? How do you feel about the discussion?
Yeah, I think that I stand by free will is so important in a discussion like this. But just to, yeah, James was just making his concluding point, and I think I do agree with something like that, that potentially in the context somewhere, and in the context of this world and earth evolution, suffering is necessary. But I don't think it is the only thing that is necessary for true wisdom.
Hmm. Okay, excellent. Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for participating. I thought it was great. My make of it was that I think this topic has a lot of, it's almost a lot of webs connected to it. It's very philosophical by its nature and very definitional. So, how are we defining suffering? How are we defining wisdom? Is consciousness attached to wisdom? Is it not? Um, what defines true wisdom as opposed to a secondary form of wisdom? Very difficult. So I think that was the value of the discussion, to kind of tease apart what it means to be wise. um, my position generally, I'm going to be a fence sitter, is the same of that of courage, in that just as one can be courageous in that they just don't feel fear, you can be courageous in that you do feel fear and you just keep moving forward. I think that, of course, in this, the middle position is true. One can be wise um, through suffering. I think suffering produces a lot of wisdom. However, suffering is not the only source of wisdom, and that one can be wise vicariously through experiencing it through other people. Obviously, that's, I'd imagine, what the panelists might generally agree with, but the idea of this is we're forcing you guys to have positions that are binary as one or the other. So, uh, well done in holding
So
that.
hard.
Sorry,
It's
what was
so
that?
hard.
Yeah, it is
I'm
hard.
such a
It is
middle
hard.
path
But you did a
person.
really good job. You guys did a really good job at holding that line. And I think James and Ari, oh no, sorry, it was the teams of the other way the other time, I'm pretty sure. But you guys learned not to concede, because it could be like an indictment a bit there. So really good job. Awesome.
Yeah, I did actually. I did learn last time, but I
Yeah.
wanted to because
Yeah, I
I
know.
actually
Honestly,
would
there's a lot
normally
of concession
lean more
points. Honestly,
towards that
everyone
other.
brought up like truth at the end of the day with regards to this great question. If anyone else has any other questions in the audience, if anyone has any feedback as well, or the biggest one is we want to hear what you guys want us to debate next. So this was
And if
really,
anyone's interested in
yes,
being
as
a
well.
debater.
Yes, if anyone wants to hop in on a debate in future, just give us a message or put your hand up, later on down the line. And yeah, we can chuck you in. We also understand that it'll depend on what you're talking about. I think going forward, the next one won't be as philosophical. We're going to get more into the kind of the theosophy, maybe mythology, maybe just esotericism. James brought up alchemy, which I think could be a really good channel we could go down. But thank you all for listening, and hope to hear back some really good feedback.
You.
Awesome. All right. Well, that concludes the debate. This is probably going to be uploaded to YouTube and also through our social media. Follow us on Academy of Theosophia to see the clips that we cut from it. And also, we'll have a YouTube channel up soon as well. So you can give us a follow there. And we're ideally going to be doing these every so often. That's right, isn't it, Ellie and James? Um,
I think we're planning for once a month.
yeah, once a month.
Who wins?
So yeah, think of some good debate topics we could do, and we'll probably chuck it into the main national chat. And yeah, also follow us on Instagram individually as well, if anyone wants to plug in Instagram. And I'll be running a symbolism workshop next week if those for those who are interested. I don't know if anyone else is running a workshop that they want to plug quickly. By any chance? No, that's okay. We got a lot more
Who
on.
won though? Who won the debate?
Oh, okay. So you okay. So do you want me to say my assessment on the debate?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was gonna be offensive and just be let the conversation be what it may. It is a really hard discussion.
Nah.
So okay, I do think both in the strength of the arguments, it's really hard because you both were winning at various points throughout. Um, I think that Angelo, in particular, I think you did a really good job. And Ellie, also, your points were very clear as well. I would give the edge to the side of Ellie and Angelo for two reasons. Is because um, your starting positions, Angelo, were very clear. I have them written down here that suffering is subjective. That if suffering is ties to wisdom, why isn't there any more wisdom? And that wisdom can come about through other virtues and not just suffering. And because you were so specific in the beginning, the whole conversation kind of just oriented around your points. So really good. We did get stuck in the weeds there with regards to consciousness for a bit, but in saying that, James and Ari, your side of the arguments were also really good. I feel like we didn't get to go into them as much, but there were a few times there where you guys had the other side pinned. So again, this was just a razor hair, but yeah, well done. What do you guys think of that?
Well done. Well done. Yeah, nothing. That's fair.
Job, everyone. Amazing.
Yeah, everyone did a really good job, and I feel like James and Ari, you guys had the harder side to debate. So-
It is harder. Yes. Thank you. I found it really challenging.
I feel, like I feel that when you guys speak, you make me think a lot. Just because like every point is very good, and they are through in their ways. Like obviously I was trying to argue on one side, but yeah, I think that suffering is a very good teacher, by the way. And I think that like historically speaking, like in all different traditions, that's acknowledged. But yeah, no, amazing, very very good points. I really like it. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
well done.
can-
Especially both of your sides were hard to argue for because, like I said, you're forced into a binary. But yeah, well done, everyone. And I hope everyone learned a lot. Like if just based on debate skills, I think a really big one is just kind of maybe thinking about what the other side will say is really hard to like predict how a conversation is going to go, but that can really serve. And also, I do think a really big determinant in the direction of this argument was the clarity from the beginning. But that's also no knock on you, James, as well, because you had really three really good points as well, but they might have been a bit too vague. That's why we didn't go into them.
Yeah, I was thinking that it might have just been a bit all over the place, but
Mm.
yeah.
I think if you had picked one of those, it probably would have made us a whole different conversation, because the evolution argument's really good, that in order for growth to happen, suffering must take place.
Mm.
So, yeah. But yeah, well done, everyone. And thanks for the audience. Stay tuned and goodbye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Malik.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Everyone.
Bye.
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 Good fun.